Hi guys, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about whether leca is better than soil. I think the thing about leca is it's one of those things that, so when you first start collecting plants, you start, getting into YouTube and finding all the rare plants and stuff and lusting after variegated monstera and that kind of thing. And inevitably the next thing is you discover people that use leca, and I'm really sorry it's shaking because I keep resting my elbows. I'm not going to stop doing that though, so just, oh my god, just stay still. So you start watching these leca videos and you're like, yeah, I'm definitely going to do that, because the advantages of leca seem so amazing once you kind of fall into that. It's kind of like a trend thing, a bit of a FOMO thing. And I'm not like, I don't want to say that that's what happens to everybody, but it's just what happened to me. And the thing that really made me want to try leca was I got a really bad thrips infestation and it was so stressful. Like, it got on my Thai constellation and I hated it so much. So I was like, well, leca, that's the way forward. I didn't start with my Thai. In fact, my Thai's actually in water because I didn't want to kill her. And the one thing I did realise was, like, people don't shy away from telling you that the transition can kill plants. So start with cheap plants. But I just want to clear up that leca and soil are different, but obviously, but one is not necessarily better than the other. So I originally was going to transfer all my plants into leca, but after I'd done a few, I realised that whilst there would be advantages to having all my plants in leca, like for a start I wouldn't end up inevitably forgetting one. There's you can't actually see it, but there's a Dracaena up there somewhere in leca that I almost never remember to water, but luckily she's a Dracaena, so she doesn't care. But yeah, but I realised that the actual faff of switching all my plants over, it's not worth it. So I just switch them as and when I do propagations, all my new propagations go into leca. So I think the biggest reason that people switch over to leca is for the same reason I did, which was because there will be fewer pests. And whilst that, I think it's true, I have found that it's true, there are fewer pests. It's not that the plants don't get the pests, they're just easier to deal with when you have them. So if you struggle with gnats, leca is a great way to reduce the amount of gnats. I wouldn't say it gets rid of them completely, because fungus gnats they eat fungus, and so they eat the fungus that grows on the top of your soil, and that is where they come from. It's like fruit flies. Like, if you leave fruit out, like old bananas and stuff, fruit flies will come. If you have damp soil, you will inevitably get gnats at some point. So if you have leca, there's no fungus on the top, so there's nothing for them to eat, so they won't turn up. But I have seen people who have gnats and all their plants are in leca, so it's not like 100% fail-safe, but it will help a lot. I'm assuming the gnats are just feeding on fungus elsewhere, or they've got fruit flies. You know, they look pretty similar, tiny annoying flies. But yeah, if fungus gnats are your primary concern, then leca is a really good option. But my issue was thrips and spider mites, and thrips and spider mites both feed on leaves. They don't care about the soil. They will, I believe, thrips eggs drop into the soil and then they come back out onto the plant, but I think they can still live perfectly happily in leca. They're thriving on some maculathea. Changing medium won't stop the problem, but I found so a lot of people go on about like systemic pesticides and stuff. I've never found anything that worked as well as I want it to. There's always going to be a bit of effort involved with getting rid of pests, and I've actually found the easiest way, it's not the easiest, the most effective way of getting rid of pests is just to keep the plants clean. If you keep washing off the eggs and the larvae and the adults, over time they'll go. They have to. There's just not a big enough population. And in leca, you can wash the leaves off without having to worry about, for a start, soiling the bath and sink, which isn't great for your plumbing. But also you don't have to worry about overwatering. You can rinse them off every day. And if you have a plant you really like, you can just keep it next to the sink, and every time you remember, just wash off the leaves. Whilst it's not like 100% brilliant, because obviously the leca does fall into the sink, it's so much easier and easier on your plants. The leca won't prevent the pests, but it will make the cure easier. Not easy, but easier. If your number one reason for switching your plants to leca is because you've got problems with thrips and spider mites, even like aphids and scale, basically anything that isn't fungus gnats, I personally wouldn't bother if that's your only reason, because you'll probably end up inevitably losing plants when you transition them, and it isn't the fail-safe that you might think that it is. There are people that say that they haven't had any thrips or spider mites since changing to Leca, and you might be lucky, but that hasn't been my experience. Especially if you already have them. You might not bring so many in, especially if you quarantine your plants properly. You might find that the populations just don't thrive as well, but they can still live on plants and Leca perfectly happily. One advantage of Leca over soil is that it is reusable. I do reuse my soil. You probably shouldn't, because it can be full of like nasties and stuff, and it does deplete in terms of nutrition over time, but I just add like worm castings and stuff and supplement it with perlite and orchid bark and that kind of thing. Leca is reusable by nature, so you're supposed to boil it after every, if you switch it from plant to plant, you're supposed to boil it. I don't, I just rinse it off, which is probably why I always end up with some sort of pest. But you can reuse it pretty much forever. From what I've found out, it doesn't seem to deteriorate with age. I'm sure it will, like in 20 years, but you can keep using it and using it and using it. This may sound like a stupid point, but I lose a lot of soil by accidentally tipping it on the floor. And when you tip Leca on the floor, you can pick it up and wash it. Whereas with soil, if you scoop it up, especially in my house, it ends up like being 50% soil, 25% dust and my hair, 25% rabbit fur. And whilst that's probably not bad for the plants, if you end up with like dust and rubbish in your soil, you'll probably end up with gnats or something. So it's not ideal. It's messy, and whereas Leca, yeah, you can tip it on the floor and you think, oh shit, Leca all over the floor. You can pick it up and put it back and use it and it's fine. So in terms of pure, if we're talking about just the medium, it is cheaper than soil, especially if you're making your own soil, because you might have an initial outlay, well, you will have an initial outlay of buying all the Leca that you need. If you don't buy any more plants, you won't need any more Leca. I suppose if you up pot. But do you know what I mean? You can just keep using it and using it and using it. Whereas with soil, it does have a shelf life, especially if you take care of your plants properly. Not like me. From that perspective, it's cheaper. But also with Leca, you also have you've got to buy the pots. You've got to buy net pots. I don't use net pots. I just use the plastic nursery pots. But you do need a cash pot to put it in. So with a nursery pot, I mean, it doesn't look aesthetically pleasing, but you can just have nursery pots on the side with soil and that's fine. But with Leca, you need to have an outer pot and an inner pot, otherwise it won't work. So, well, it will, but you'd be forever using the shower method, and then you may as well just use soil. So I couldn't say definitively whether or not soil was cheaper than Leca. And I don't know enough about the origins of Leca and clay and the sustainableness of the Leca to know if it was ethically better than soil. So I don't know. But in terms of like being able to reuse stuff, Leca is definitely superior and easier to store. Like you can dry it out and just store it, and it doesn't go mouldy and it won't attract flies or anything. It's like in a bag of stones. As well as having to buy the initial Leca and the pot, you also have the issue that you might lose plants during transition. I don't think I ever have. I've had them that have died. They've got established in Leca and then they've died. I'm not saying like it'll definitely keep your plants alive, but some plants just can't take the shock of being transferred from Leca to soil. They just from soil to Leca, they just won't, they don't do it. And it's not I was going to say breed specific, it's not species specific, it's just some plants are stronger than others. Some plants take to it, others don't. If you go on any like Leca Facebook groups, you'll find that some people would never ever consider putting a pothos in Leca, and other people think it's the easiest. It's like general plant care. Some people find Calathea easy to care for, others don't. It's just look at the draw. If you are on limited time, this is such a difficult thing to explain. If you're on limited time with your plant care and you have a lot of plants, after the initial transition, which is like not a small feat, you might need to take a week off work or something, I think that caring for plants with Leca is easier because you can schedule it out. You can set aside an hour a week to water, and adding fertiliser is a lake, but it's not hard and it doesn't take that long, especially if you use like Dynagrow, which is an all-in-one fertilizer. I use General Hydroponics, the 3-step, the Flora system, so that's a little bit more complicated, but it's not difficult. So yeah, people would say, well, it's more difficult because you've got to do the flushing and stuff like that. I don't flush as often as maybe I should, and I've never seen adverse reactions. I just flush when I see the white crystals on top of the leca, and even then, like, I don't flush that often. I think it's one of those things that's more important when you're first starting and the mineral builds up on a weaker plant. It might be more dangerous, whereas when they're more established, they're not that bothered. Does that make any sense? Just going back to the scheduling thing, one thing I have found is easier to deal with when plants are in leca is actually washing the leaves. If you struggle with that, you can do your shower, the flushing and the cleaning of the leaves all in one go, especially if you've got a bath. Just shove all the plants in the bath and shower them all off. That's your flushing and your cleaning done. I mean, I'm terrible at remembering to clean and flush my plants, but when I get it into my head, I'm like, no, I need to flush them and move them all to the bath. Yeah, it's a bit of a pain, but it doesn't take that long, and it takes the same amount of time as it would to go around with a cloth and wipe them all down. So if you are one of those people that like to schedule out your whole life, so if you're really busy, you work long hours and you've only got like an hour a week to put aside to clean, dust, propagate, all that stuff, having everything in leca does make it easier because you don't have to worry about overwatering, missing a watering, that kind of thing. Take a couple of hours, move all your plants into the bathroom, shove them in the bath, shower them all down, they're flushed, they're clean, put them all back, water them with the nutrient water, and you're done. I usually water mine with nutrient water, like nearly every time I water, just because I've not seen any adverse effects and they're all growing well. But what a lot of people do is just use nutrient water once a month and then top up with just tap water or filtered water or whatever, and then flush and then refill with nutrient water monthly. It's one of those things that there isn't a right answer, and if you Google it, there will be 400 different ways people do it. So it's just working out what works for your plants, and not even what works for your plants, more what works out for you, because plants tend to, as long as you're fertilising them sometimes, they will be fine. One thing I do think leca is really good for is propagating plants, because you don't need to worry about changing the water as often, and you don't need to worry about transitioning them back into soil. If you do want to transition them back into soil, then fine. But I like to propagate in leca and then grow them on in leca. So eventually, once they're all propagated down to nothing, I think that's how I'm going to actually make sure all my plants are transitioned, is I'm just going to take cuttings and cuttings and cuttings, grow them in leca slowly so I don't lose like massive plants, and then eventually just chuck away. I'll just have roots left in the soil and then I can just chuck it away. I've no idea if that'll work. But yeah, propagating in leca I've found to be have a much higher success rate than just water or soil. Soil, I never propagate in soil because I always let it dry out and they always die. Water, it's okay, but I've found that some of my plants just do not propagate well in water. Aneurophytophora, philodendron, they just don't. I don't know if it's my water, if it's me, I don't know what it is, but I've found to have a much higher success rate with leca. And you can buy like little net pots, really cheap on Amazon, fill them with leca, stick them in a yogurt pot or something as a cash bow, fill it with water, and then what I tend to do is actually do what people suggest you shouldn't do, which is fill up the water in the leca so it hits the node, and then as the water goes down, the leca will still retain the moisture. And I found that works well. Now, obviously, I found this out by trying to propagate a plant in leca, leaving the water up above the node because I thought that would increase the chances. And the intention was, because I would be changing the water, would be to keep the water level above the node. But I didn't. I just abandoned it, and it grew, and I found that worked well. So I found that, yeah, as lazy propagation methods go, leca is probably the best because the leca retains water, the roots won't dry out. I mean, it's worth a try. Leca is so cheap and reusable, and you can always add it to your soil if you decide that you don't want to keep doing that. You can get pretty cheap bags from IKEA. I get mine from Amazon because I get it in massive, like 50-litre bags. We actually used it in our pond this year and it's worked really, really well, because I was looking for it and I thought my boyfriend had maybe chucked it out when he was cleaning out the shed, and I was really mad. And then I discovered that he just filled a massive like bed in the pond with Leca. So I'm going to be picking that out. One thing I do see people mention a bit is that plants grown in Leca will never grow as big as they would in the soil. I don't know if that's true, because I've had plants that were doing really, really badly in soil and then did really well in Leca. My Pothos Marble Queen, she grew pretty slow, not badly, but she grew pretty slowly in soil. In Leca, she just went wild, and she may not go get those massive leaves that, because most pothos can grow like massive, massive fenestrated leaves, but I don't know if she was ever going to grow like that. So while she might be technically stunted in Leca, I don't think she was ever going to grow much bigger in soil. So I think it's one of those things where it doesn't really matter that much. I mean, if your plants are outside and you live in somewhere with like a tropical climate, then you may find that plants grow bigger in soil. I don't know, but I wouldn't, if you want to try Leca, don't be put off by the fact your plant might be stunted, because it's not something that I've seen. Plants have grown quickly and their leaves are growing big and they're growing really well in Leca. Yeah, I don't know if it's just like a rumour. There's a problem with like houseplants. There are so many rumours that start and then it becomes a big thing, and then it's like you end up like divided. The Monstera Borsigiana versus Deliciosa, like people saying they're two different plants. And I always stayed away from that argument because I don't know, I'm not a botanist, and to be perfectly honest, I really don't care. But then I read an article from somewhere, and they basically Kew Gardens have said, no, they are the same plant. There is no genetic difference between them, they are the same plant. And there's still people in the comments going, no, they are different plants. But it's cute, like that's their job, surely. Like I don't know. I just think it's interesting that we end up divided on something that really, really doesn't matter. And I don't know if it started because I have a sneaky suspicion that somebody bought a Monstera and was like, it's not growing very big, and the seller was like, oh yeah, no, it's because it's a different type. When in reality, the reason it didn't grow massive, leaves that big with holes in, is because it's been grown in like a flat in Camden as opposed to some exposed wall in Florida. So yeah, to answer a very easy question, whether Leca is better than soil, no, they're just different. And it really depends on, it doesn't even really depend on your plant, although some do better than others, not species wise, but like specimen to specimen. It's your approach to plant care. If you prefer a more rigid, I must water once a week, then Leca is definitely for you. But like I like both. If somebody said to me, you can only use Leca or you can only use soil, I don't really care. It's fine. Either is fine. So it's fun to try, but don't think it's going to be the answer to all your problems, because it's not always. I'm going to hope that I can edit this into something that's not just one long stream of verbal diarrhea, but I've not got high hopes. So if you made it this far, well done, proud of you. As you can probably tell by my voice, the long COVID is strong this week, so I'm really breathy and like I can only apologise. So yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below. I've got a couple of articles on my website that goes into this in more detail and more coherently than whatever that video just was. So I will link those below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye! That was a weird bye. This is another bye in case I have to edit out the first one.